Welcome back to Briggs on Books, our truly international talk show. We've been talking to authors from all over the world today, and Scotland and India and a third country, the United States of America. I think we're going to have a guest coming up next. Our next guest is Laura. I didn't even rehearse saying her name, but welcome, Laura. Vosika?
Yes, you got it right.
Fair enough. Where are you right now?
Well, right now I'm in the Appalachian Mountains, which marks me as an outlander because here they say Appalachian, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my tongue around that, but we now live in Tennessee.
In Tennessee. Okay, great. Now, you do a lot of stuff. You're a musician, you write books, maybe some, well, let me just pop this first book up, Bluebells of Scotland, and there's the cover. Is this a series?
Yeah, it is a series, and it was originally meant to be a standalone book, just one story. And my sister read it, and she said, "What happens next?" And I thought, well, he's dead, so nothing happens next. And I reread it and realized I never actually said he died. So I thought, well, what if he survived this awful injury? What would happen? And so this is actually the old cover. There's a newer one that I like better. And so our hero spends a couple of years in medieval Scotland. He's a modern musician, a trombone player, fighting for Robert the Bruce.
Nice. Yeah.
He eventually makes his way home. And so it ends up being a story of how he changes by seeing life through a very different lens.
Did you say he was a trombone player?
He is, yes.
And did you have to do a lot of research into ancient Scotland?
Yes. Ancient Scotland, well, medieval Scotland technically is something that I knew very little about. So on my first draft, they had their kilts in 1314. They had their blue paint because, I had watched the Mel Gibson version. Yeah. And then I started doing research, and I kind of joked I had to take off all their paint. I had to give them all new clothes because I knew nothing about it. I had to research, did they have buttons? Did they have cannons in 1314? It was a very steep learning curve, but very, very interesting.
Well, it's funny that you say he's a trombone player because I'm just putting a picture up of you on the screen playing the trombone, or a couple of trombones.
Yes. I believe that's the one from, I was giving a talk called Scotland in the Eyes of the Author, and one of those is actually a sackbut, which is a word that kind of gives people pause and makes them do a double take. But a sackbut is a medieval version of a trombone, and so my now husband, Chris, bought me a sackbut. And it's a very interesting thing because modern trombone, I was a professional trombonist for quite a few years. I played in big bands and symphonies. A modern trombone is a very heavy instrument in comparison. And when you pick up a sackbut, which I think might be in my right hand in that picture, it's a very light instrument. And so at the crook at the back, they would actually take a weight and hang it off that back to give it a little counterweight.
A little more balance. Interesting. Now, so back to Bluebells of Scotland.
Right.
So as you're starting to research, you found you were maybe romanticizing some of it, and you had to change some of the outfits and stuff.
Yeah.
And by the way, who should read this? Is this a romance? What's your genre?
It's very interesting. I do not consider it a romance at all, but I have seen a number of people list it as a romance and categorize it that way. And there are some stories of romance running through it. So there is Neil, who's the medieval counterpart to Sean, the modern musician. They happen to look alike, and there's a reason for that. Yeah. And Neil has his betrothed, and through the whole book, he's been trying to marry her, and he keeps being interrupted by war and being sent off to war. And so there's that romance going on. There's kind of lost romance of Hugh and the Laird, who have both lost their wives. There is the romance, if you want to call it that, between Sean and Amy. Sean is the modern musician, and he's you might want to call him a narcissist. You might just want to call him arrogant and obnoxious. And he's kind of bordering on abusive, not physically, but really kind of uses Amy shamelessly. So there is that, and she truly loves him and thinks he's a better person than what he shows the world, but she eventually has enough. There ends up being a romance between Sean and Christina in the past. And so there definitely is romance, but it's a lot of adventure, it's a lot of history, it's a lot of crisscrossing Scotland. There are some battle scenes, there are some, I don't think they're necessarily graphic or gory, but I do try to get at what life was really like in those days, to not romanticize it, but to say it was rough.
It was rough, yeah.
Good points.
Now, if somebody is familiar with Scotland, would they recognize his places in the book?
I think so. And in fact, one of the things I'm very proud of about these books is I had a friend named Elaine in Scotland. So if her family's listening, hello. And she, when she knew I was coming on my next research trip, she invited me to visit her. And I thought she was another author I had networked with. And it turned out she was a reader. She told me, as I've been told by one or two other Scots too, that they usually don't like books about Scotland by American authors because they get it wrong.
Right.
And she was very excited. She said, you did the history, you did the research, and you got it right. That's and great. So, yes, every place in this book, apart from Glenmural itself, I fictionalized that, but it's based on Urquhart Castle. And I think anyone who really knows Scotland would recognize Urquhart. So,
would recognize it, yeah.
Would recognize.
I have another slide here that you'd sent us, the Bluebell Chronicles. Does this show other books in the series?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think about 4 books, I think, or 5 books.
Yeah, I think that might be the first. Oh, that one is all 5 books. Yes.
All 5 books, yeah. That's just great. Now, I have another slide I want to ask you about, and it shows a book, I think, called The 4 Spheres, Habits for a Better Life.
Mm-hmm.
By...
Yeah, that's a book that I would really love to have people try out and use. And it's built on this idea that is a very ancient idea that you need to have 4 things in your life every day. You need to have a physical activity. You need to have some mental activity to challenge your brain. You need to have a spiritual activity to kind of build your connection to the spiritual. And you need to have something creative and fulfilling. And when you do that, you're probably going to be much happier than if you don't.
Do all 4. So people need to get this book. By the way, do you have a website or someplace we could direct people to?
Yes. Yeah, it's a really easy one to find, either bluebellschronicles.com or Laura Vosika, that's V as in Victor, OSIKA.com, and both will take you to the same site.
And what will we find there? Will we find that book, the 4 Spheres?
Yes, you should be able to find the 4 Spheres there. I'll double check, make sure I've added it,
Okay.
but it should be there. And if not, all my books are available on Amazon.com. You can order them from any brick and mortar store too.
One more slide just popped up. Let's see what this is. Saint in the Cellar.
Oh, yes. That is a really favorite project of mine, and I do have a hard copy here too. This is a book I wrote with my husband, and it's actually set in an actual historic house on Summit Hill in St. Paul. So for those who know Summit Hill in St. Paul, it's where some of the really wealthy barons of the late 1800s built their homes. And this book came about because at the time we were looking at houses, we went to look at this one. I was also studying or researching for my books. And so I had just come across this idea of anchorites, who are people who would seal themselves. They would literally have themselves sealed into a brick room that had one window into the church and another window to the street. And that way they could attend Mass and they could counsel people on the streets and they could spend their day praying. And so we went down into, it's a basement in this house, but it's the most beautiful basement you'll ever see, fully finished, absolutely gorgeous. And we saw this little room that you could go into, and it had a window into the other room. And we both looked at each other and immediately thought of anchorites, and we said, there's a saint in the cellar. And so then we had to write a book to go with that great title. And so The Saint in the Cellar is about a little boy whose parents are both kind of wealthy, up and coming, very highly motivated professionals. And they move him into this new house. And he's a very imaginative boy, and he believes that he's living this alternate life with this red dragon he has to fight in medieval times. And so it's a story of what is he really experiencing when he goes down to the cellar and he finds a saint living in
Finds
his
a saint
cellar.
in the cellar. That's fascinating. You wrote it with your husband. That's wonderful that you did that.
Yeah.
Laura, I could talk to you all day long, but we're running out of time. What else do you want our viewers to know that we have not covered?
Well, I would love for you to know that my books are very, very historically based, which I love reading history because
Yeah.
I learned something about it, and sometimes I'm frustrated when I find the history isn't accurate. In fact, it's totally different. So my books are historical to the detail, apart from, the main characters and time travel itself. And I also do have this other book of kind of paranormal short stories. And I would also like to mention this book that I wrote with, I want to say he's the main author because he is. I'm more of the co-author, but he was gracious enough to put my name on the cover. And I think it's a wonderful book, also very historically based, but he weaves in this fantastic story of this race to find magical amulets. And I think it's a great book. I really enjoyed working with him on it.
It sounds like you do a lot of research.
I love research.
And I love a well-researched book, and it makes a lot of difference. You can tell when you're reading them, too, if the person has research, so good for you. Tell us the web address again.
LauraVosika.com. V as in Victor, Osika.
Okay, we have it on the screen. We don't have the whole web address, but Laura Vosika is there. Go to LauraVosika.com and find out more. And it was... You're delightful. I'm very happy we talked. This is a great, one of my most fun interviews ever. And
Well, thank you.
I won't give out your email, but I'll tell the people. It has to do with Pachelbel, which I got all kinds of great Pachelbel stories. A great composer.
Yes, because you're a musician
yeah,
too.
Canon in D and things like that. Thank you, Laura. I really appreciate your time. And we'll talk to you again very soon, I hope.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with another author right after this.